Hello and welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and I have a special guest with me today. It is
Amarjeet Sohi, Mayor of Edmonton.
Construction fans would know Amarjeet Sohi. Also, as the former Minister of Infrastructure, that's where I'm going to begin with my questions. What experience did you take from that file to becoming mayor? Because I'm assuming infrastructure is a really big part of being the mayor of Edmonton.
Actually, one of the reasons I ran for city council to start with was to promote the building of the LRT from the area that I represented at that time to downtown. Mm-hmm. And so I have been passionate about infrastructure and why infrastructure is so critical to help spur economic growth as well as build more sustainable, inclusive and welcoming communities. And also as an immigrant to this country, I benefited a lot from community-based infrastructure like transit infrastructure, libraries, rec centers, and other cultural facilities, right? So I really understand the value why well-functioning, appropriate infrastructure is so critical for building dynamic places for all of us to live in.
Yeah, that's actually a part of the infrastructure story that barely ever gets told, where, like you said, if you're a new immigrant to the country, you're relying on all this stuff. So maybe you could go into a little more detail on that in terms of where Edmonton's going, because I would assume Edmonton's projecting, from everything I've heard, 2 million people in the next 30 years. So a lot of those will be immigrants.
That's true. When I got here, I didn't have much resources, so I relied a lot on getting around on public transit to go to school, to go to meet with friends, to find a better job. And, I learned the language. I couldn't speak English when I got here. I learned the language by going to the library, picking up books, and then going to rec centers to play soccer or meet up with friends and build connections to the community. So that would not have been possible if city did not have that infrastructure and the services being provided through that infrastructure available to people like me and many, many, many other people. So you just can't imagine a functioning city without having a functioning roadway system, without having a functioning transit system, without having a functioning recreational facilities, libraries, fire halls, EMS stations, police stations. So all those things that we don't think about as sometimes as critical, and we sometimes don't even define them as infrastructure, but they're so critical. They're so important.
What would you say where is Edmonton ahead of other cities in terms of infrastructure, and where is it behind? Where do you think needs to be addressed?
We caught up a lot on physical roadway infrastructure. We are building, expanding the Yellowhead Freeway. That was a long overdue expansion that was necessary. That'll be done over the next 4 to 5 years. All the funding has been allocated. We are catching up on some of the overpasses that are needed to increase the flow of goods and services that was impeded. So we are catching up on that. We are also catching up on our LRT construction. We were behind for decades in building the LRT in our city. Edmonton and Calgary started building LRTs at the same time in the 70s, but we stopped. But Calgary continued, and their system is much more larger and more integrated, and now we are catching up. And the Southeast LRT will be operational this summer, and then we will continue to expand it to the West End and to the Southwest, and eventually into the northwest part of the city. So we're catching up on that. Another thing that I think very unique to Edmonton, that it's a very good Edmonton story to be told, which is how we maintain our neighborhood infrastructure.
Hmm.
When I got elected in 2007, our city council was at the start of having discussions about rehabilitation of hundreds of neighborhoods that we have, and we were only repairing one neighborhood a year, and we have, I think, 350 residential and industrial and commercial neighborhoods. So just imagine doing one every year,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
deteriorating effect of that. So what we did, we put together a dedicated tax levy dedicated to rehabilitating those neighborhoods. Now we are, I think, doing 25 neighborhoods, and every neighborhood will be kept to very good standards. And I think it's a very good story of forward thinking and maintaining the existing infrastructure and making sure that all the amenities that are necessary in the neighborhood are provided.
I'm a former resident of Edmonton myself. I grew up there and I left in the 2000s, but I lived downtown in the 90s. And I just did a story about Warehouse Park, which is going to make
Mhm.
downtown more walking and residential. What are some other, I mean, that's kind of a general shift in the last 20 years for Edmonton, but what are some other livability projects that are in the works or happening right now?
I'm glad you mentioned downtown because before COVID, Edmonton's downtown was thriving.
Mhm.
We were on the rise. We invested a lot of money into public infrastructure to facilitate the building of the Rogers Place. That acted as a catalyst for a couple of hotels, residential towers, commercial buildings, and couple that with the LRT connections and the billions of dollars that we were investing in that, and then the revitalization of streetscape and all that, and the warehouse park that you mentioned. Unfortunately, COVID has set us behind, and
Mhm.
once we are out of COVID, we will hopefully pick up where we left and move forward and continue to see that kind of vibrancy, bring back that kind of vibrancy. So that's something that I am committed to absolutely making sure it happens. So a lot of work that is being happening in the downtown and surrounding neighborhoods is very critical work.
And you mentioned COVID. What, in terms of municipal infrastructure, like public buildings, I know, are you looking at retrofitting for better ventilation or social distancing after the pandemic is done, whenever that is? And are other aspects of the quote unquote new normal? How do you modify existing infrastructure? Because a lot of it's old or older and isn't set up for that task.
Yeah, so under our capital investment plan, we have a very good balance of building new infrastructure as
Mhm.
well as investing into rehabilitation of the existing infrastructure. So in the recent budget, we gave approval to a couple of major recreational centers that we need to build, and they will be built to higher standards. The Lewis State Farm Rec Center, the Coronation, and the Peter Hemingway Rehabilitation, and then building a maintenance yard in the southwest part of the city to improve snow removal and cleaning services. Uh, the I think as we recover from COVID, we need to start reimagining our public places and our public buildings differently because there's a lot of empty space,
Mhm.
private sector empty space. How we work with private sector to create maybe more space for cultural organizations or festivals and other needs. How we maybe convert that commercial business office space to more residential housing for downtown and other parts of the city. I think COVID does present us with challenges. I think we also presents us with some opportunities to rethink and reimagine some of those spaces.
Okay, and finally, I'm based out of Vancouver, and recently in November we had a flood that cut off the entire city, basically, because all the routes were closed. Obviously, Edmonton has much different geographic concerns but you still got to worry about climate change. So, what are some say, worst case scenarios that Edmonton's looking at and mitigating against in terms of climate change?
We put together, previous council worked really hard to put together a climate change energy transition plan in place that focuses on mitigation of the impact of climate change. One challenge that we faced quite a bit was flooding in communities, particularly communities that I represented in southwest part of the city. And we worked together with our utility company, EPCOR, to come up with a plan and the drainage plan to control flooding, to make sure that we're upgrading the infrastructure necessary. And we were able to access federal funding that I was able to create a program when I was a federal minister of infrastructure, the flood mitigation and a disaster mitigation plan that we were able to put together. So I think those are the kind of partnerships that we need to look at. I think climate change presents us with a big opportunity for economic growth. Uh, Edmonton is well positioned because this is where the emissions are. And if Canada is serious about reducing emissions, they need to work with Edmonton and Edmonton region and Alberta to make sure that those emissions are reduced. How you reduce those emissions, we need to make sure that how we capture them. So carbon capture, storage, utilization, technology investments, hydrogen has a huge potential in Alberta and capital region. How do we electrify our existing fleet, whether it's transit fleet or garbage collection vehicles and all that, right? And I think there's so many opportunities that are in front of us that we can help create jobs at the same time reduce emissions. Another is retrofitting our buildings, as we were talking about earlier on. What we do with these old buildings as we repurpose them for different use, let's do major energy retrofits as well, right? I think that presents us with opportunities to again create local jobs, blue collar jobs that are necessary, and reduce emissions as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for joining us, Mayor Sohi.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.